On a spring morning in May 1942, Commander Takeshi Yamamoto stood in the weapons testing facility at Yokosuka Naval Arsenal, overlooking Tokyo Bay. Before him, on an examination table, lay a weapon that would force him to confront an uncomfortable truth about Japan's war with the United States. The rifle had arrived 3 weeks earlier, transported by submarine from the Philippines, carefully wrapped in oilcloth alongside captured documents and ammunition. This was an M1 Garand, the semi-automatic rifle that had already proven devastatingly effective against Japanese forces during the fall of Bataan. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Intelligence reports had warned that American infantry possessed superior small arms, generating volumes of fire that seemed impossible from standard infantry weapons. Japanese commanders initially dismissed these reports as exaggerations born of combat stress. But here was the physical proof, a rifle that would challenge everything Japanese military doctrine assumed about infantry combat. Yamamoto had served as a weapons development officer for the Imperial Japanese Navy since 1938. He had examined captured British Lee Enfields and Dutch rifles taken in Singapore and Java, but this American rifle was fundamentally different. As he lifted the M1 Garand and sighted down the barrel, he could feel the balance and ergonomics that spoke of serious engineering intent. This weapon had been designed not just to function, but to function at industrial scale, produced by the tens of thousands for a war that would be won through manufacturing might. The M1 Garand weighed approximately 9.5 pounds, heavier than the Type 99 Arisaka that armed Japanese infantry. Yet as Yamamoto worked the operating rod and examined the gas system, he understood he was holding something revolutionary. This was a semi-automatic rifle issued as standard equipment to every American infantryman, a technological philosophy Japan had never fully embraced. To understand the significance of what Yamamoto was examining, one must first understand what Japanese soldiers carried into battle. The Type 99 Arisaka bolt-action rifle, introduced in 1939, was the standard Japanese infantry weapon. It was a superb bolt-action rifle by any measure accurate, reliable in harsh conditions, and built with exceptional steel that made it one of the strongest military rifles ever manufactured. Japanese craftsmen took pride in their work, hand-fitting components to exacting standards. But it was still a bolt-action rifle. After each shot, the soldier had to manually cycle the bolt, load, fire, lift the bolt handle, pull back, push forward, lock down, fire again. In trained hands, a skilled Japanese soldier could fire perhaps 15 aimed rounds per minute from his Arisaka. This had proven sufficient when facing Chinese forces, armed with similar bolt-action Mausers. It had been adequate in Malaya and the Dutch East Indies, where British and Dutch colonial forces also carried bolt-action rifles. But the Americans had changed the rules of infantry combat entirely. They had armed every rifleman with a weapon that eliminated the manual cycling requirement, allowing continuous fire as fast as the trigger could be pulled. The examination began with disassembly. Yamamoto pressed the trigger guard catch and lifted the trigger housing away from the receiver. The simplicity was remarkable. No tools required. A soldier could field strip this weapon in darkness, in rain, in the chaos of combat. He removed the operating rod, noting the long-stroke gas piston system that made the magic happen. When a cartridge fired, propellant gases were diverted through a port drilled in the barrel. These gases drove a piston attached to the operating rod, which cycled the action automatically. The bolt opened, the spent cartridge, case ejected, a fresh round fed from the magazine, and the bolt closed all in a fraction of a second. The soldier simply pulled the trigger again. Japanese engineers had examined gas-operated systems before. Their own experiments in the early 1930 seconds had explored similar mechanisms, but those prototype rifles had been complex, difficult to manufacture, and ultimately abandoned when war with China erupted in 1937. The Germans had also struggled with semi-automatic rifle development. Their Gewehr 41 models used complicated gas trap systems that fouled easily and added unnecessary weight. But the Americans had solved the engineering problems and done something far more significant. They had industrialized the solution. Every American rifleman carried this weapon, not elite units, not specialists. Every infantryman in the United States Army and Marine Corps. The manufacturing implications were staggering. Lieutenant Nakamura, Yamamoto's assistant, carefully recorded measurements in a leather-bound notebook. The rifle fed from an 8-round en-bloc clip, a stamped metal clip that inserted directly into the rifle's action. When the last round fired, the clip ejected automatically with a distinctive metallic ping. The bolt locked open, signaling the need for reloading. A trained soldier could reload in 3 seconds. The mathematics were brutal and undeniable. In the time required for a Japanese soldier to fire 15 carefully aimed shots from his Arisaka, working the bolt between each round, an American soldier with his M1 Garand could fire 40 to 50 rounds. The American simply pulled the trigger 8 times in rapid succession, reloaded with a fresh clip in seconds, then fired 8 more rounds. His aim was barely disturbed by the rifle's modest recoil. His sight picture remained consistent between shots because the action stayed closed during the firing cycle. If this story is capturing your interest, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more detailed historical content like this to life, and it ensures you'll be notified when we release our next deep dive into history. This wasn't theoretical speculation. Japanese forces had encountered this firepower disparity in combat, and the reports were disturbing. The first accounts came from the Philippines in December 1941 and January 1942. American and Filipino forces defending Bataan had been equipped with several thousand M1 Garand rifles that had arrived in the Philippines between August and November 1941. These rifles equipped the elite Philippine Scouts, American regulars, and select Filipino units. Japanese infantry advancing against American positions in the jungle terrain of Bataan described a wall of rifle fire unlike anything they had experienced. Not machine gun fire, which they expected and knew how to suppress, but rifle fire, continuous and accurate rifle fire from individual positions. When Japanese soldiers raised their heads to fire, multiple rounds came back immediately from each American position. The volume was overwhelming. One captured Japanese after-action report, now in Yamamoto's possession, described an engagement near the Abukai line in January 1942. A reinforced Japanese company attempted to overrun an American platoon holding a road junction. The Americans, outnumbered nearly 3-1, generated such volume of fire that the Japanese attack faltered. The report's author, a company commander who survived with severe wounds, wrote that enemy rifle fire created the effect of multiple machine gun nests, making movement impossible and causing casualties that exceeded planning estimates by a factor of 2. General Douglas MacArthur had sent a telegram to the War Department in February 1942, specifically praising the M1 Garand's performance. The rifle operated with deadly precision, even in the dust and dirt of foxhole fighting, in many cases remaining in constant action for a week without cleaning or lubrication. This telegram had been intercepted and decoded by Japanese signals intelligence, confirming what battlefield reports indicated. By the time Bataan fell on the 9th of April 1942, Japanese intelligence had collected enough field reports to understand a fundamental problem. American infantry firepower exceeded Japanese infantry firepower even when Japanese forces held numerical superiority. The Arisaka rifle, for all its qualities, could not compete with the M1 Garand in sustained firefights. Yamamoto understood that examining this single captured rifle was merely the first step. The harder questions loomed like dark clouds on the horizon. Could Japan manufacture a similar weapon? Did Japan possess the industrial capacity to produce such rifles in the numbers required to equip entire divisions? Most critically, could Japanese industry achieve the precision manufacturing at scale that the American weapon clearly demonstrated? He hefted the rifle again, feeling its weight and balance. The stock was American walnut, well fitted to the metal components. The gas cylinder tube ran beneath the barrel, protected but accessible for maintenance. The trigger was crisp, braking cleanly at approximately 5.5 pounds of pressure. The sights were simple, but effective. Everything about this weapon spoke of practical design refined through testing and optimized for production. Lieutenant Nakamura looked up from his notes with a troubling observation. They had attempted to test-fire the rifle using Japanese 7.7mm Type 99 ammunition. The cartridge dimensions were similar to the American, 30-06 Springfield, but the clip would not feed reliably. The rounds jammed during the loading cycle. This was expected. The unblock clip had been designed specifically for American ammunition dimensions. Even small variations in cartridge case rim thickness or overall length would prevent reliable feeding. If Japan intended to adapt this design, they would need to solve the present ammunition compatibility problem, either modify the clips to accept Japanese cartridges or redesign the feed system entirely. When Yamamoto asked about manufacturing complexity, Nakamura's assessment was sobering. The receiver required precision machining from forged steel. The operating rod and gas piston were carefully toleranced. The trigger group contained approximately 15 separate components that must work in harmony. The barrel required rifling to exacting standards. This was not a simple weapon to manufacture, but it was also not impossibly complex. What impressed Nakamura most was that the Americans had clearly designed this rifle for mass production. Many components were interchangeable. He had examined parts from 3 different captured rifles received from Manila. Components from one rifle functioned perfectly in another. This suggested the Americans were maintaining very tight manufacturing tolerances across thousands of examples. This was perhaps the most impressive aspect of the M1 Garand, not that it existed, but that it existed in such numbers. American industry was producing these rifles by the thousands, maintaining quality standards that Japanese craftsmen struggled to achieve even in small batches. It represented a manufacturing philosophy that prioritized volume and consistency over artisan craftsmanship. Japanese military production emphasized quality through skilled labor. Rifle actions were hand-fitted by experienced gunsmiths. Each weapon was carefully inspected and adjusted. This produced excellent individual rifles, but it limited production capacity. Workers took pride in their craftsmanship, ensuring each rifle met high standards. The Americans had inverted this approach. They designed weapons for manufacture by specialized machinery operated by workers with minimal training. What they sacrificed in individual weapon perfection, they gained in overwhelming numerical superiority. American factories could produce thousands of rifles while maintaining consistency that made all parts interchangeable. Yamamoto picked up a brass cartridge from the examination table, an American 30-06 Springfield round captured alongside the rifle. The cartridge propelled a 150-grain bullet at approximately 2,800 feet per second, delivering substantial energy at extended ranges. The Japanese 7.7mm Type 99 cartridge was similar in performance, though not identical, but effective range mattered little when one side could fire 3 times as many rounds in the same period. The tactical advantage of the M1 Garand wasn't primarily about accuracy or power. It was about volume of fire. An American squad of 12 men, each armed with an M1 Garand, could generate firepower that rivaled Japanese machine gun teams. More critically, this firepower was distributed across the entire squad. Suppressing an American squad required suppressing 12 individually armed soldiers, each capable of delivering rapid, accurate fire. Japanese doctrine relied heavily on the Type 96 and Type 99 light machine guns, excellent weapons that provided squad-level automatic fire. But machine guns required crews, ammunition bearers, and were vulnerable when targeted. The Americans had essentially given every rifleman a weapon approaching light machine gun rates of fire, without the crew requirements or vulnerability of crew-served weapons. The strategic implications extended far beyond tactical firefights. If American infantry possessed inherent firepower superiority, Japanese forces would need numerical superiority just to achieve parity in small unit engagements. But Japan was already overextended, fighting on multiple fronts across a vast Pacific theater. The nation lacked the manpower to achieve 3-to-1 numerical superiority everywhere, and even if they could mass such numbers, American artillery, air power, and logistics would negate those advantages. Yamamoto recognized what this meant with chilling clarity. Japan needed its own semi-automatic rifle, and they needed it quickly. The Americans were still reeling from Pearl Harbor and the loss of the Philippines, but they would recover. American industrial might, once fully mobilized, would produce weapons in quantities Japan could never match. The window for developing a response was narrowing with each passing day. "Lieutenant," Yamamoto said, "prepare a comprehensive technical report on this weapon. Include detailed drawings of all major components. Calculate production requirements, necessary tooling, and estimated per-unit costs. I want specifications for a Japanese rifle based on this design, but modified to accept our standard ammunition and simplified for our manufacturing capabilities." He understood the challenges immediately. Developing such a rifle would require significant time and resources. Japan was at war on multiple fronts. Industrial capacity was strained. Developing new weapons systems competed with producing existing weapons, ammunition, and equipment for forces already engaged. Nevertheless, the report had to be prepared. Japanese infantry faced American forces, who possessed clear firepower superiority at the individual level. This advantage would only grow as American production increased. If Japan did nothing, their soldiers would continue fighting with obsolete weapons against an enemy who improved daily. The examination continued through the afternoon. Yamamoto test-fired the rifle at the arsenal's range, experiencing firsthand the rapid follow-up shots and minimal disruption to aim between rounds. He fired 80 rounds, reloading 10 times with captured en-bloc clips. The rifle functioned flawlessly, no malfunctions, no stoppages, no failures to feed or extract. As evening approached, Yamamoto compiled his initial observations. The rifle proved that semi-automatic operation was not just feasible, but essential for modern infantry combat. The Germans were learning this lesson in Russia, where they faced Soviet SVT-40 semi-automatic rifles. The Americans had learned it earlier, adopting the M1 Garand before entering the war. Now Japan faced the consequences of having cancelled their own semi-automatic rifle programs in the 1,930 seconds. Take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you're enjoying this historical deep dive. We put extensive research into every video to bring you stories that deserve to be told. Your subscription helps us continue this work. But understanding the problem and solving it were entirely different challenges. Yamamoto knew that even if Japan could reverse engineer this rifle and adapt it to their ammunition, manufacturing it in meaningful numbers would require industrial capacity the nation simply didn't possess. American factories were producing M1 Garands at rates exceeding 4,000 per day by early 1942. Springfield Armory and Winchester Repeating Arms had achieved production efficiency that Japanese arsenals could not match. The captured rifle represented more than superior technology. It represented an entire industrial system optimized for mass production. American workers, many of them women with no prior manufacturing experience, were operating specialized machinery that maintained perfect parts interchangeability across thousands of rifles. This was the arsenal of democracy in physical form, a philosophy that viewed industrial capacity as military power. Japanese military culture emphasized different values: elite units with specialized weapons, individual skill and warrior spirit, the belief that superior training and fighting determination could overcome material disadvantages. These beliefs had served Japan well in the early stages of the war against colonial forces and Chinese armies. But against American forces, these beliefs were proving inadequate. The M1 Garand didn't win battles through elegance or precision. It won through overwhelming firepower delivered by ordinary soldiers. It democratized military effectiveness, allowing a drafted clerk or farmer to generate firepower that previously required years of training. This was profoundly threatening to a military establishment that prided itself on professional excellence and warrior tradition. The evening news broadcasts spoke of glorious victories. Singapore had fallen in February. The Dutch East Indies were secure. Burma was being conquered. Japanese forces controlled an empire stretching from the borders of India to the Central Pacific. But Yamamoto had read the casualty reports from the Philippines carefully. He understood what the propaganda didn't acknowledge. Japan's victories were being won against colonial forces, defending distant territories with limited resources and no prospect of reinforcement. But the Americans were fighting for their own territory, and they were just beginning to mobilize. The M1 Garand was early evidence of what was coming. American factories, converting to war production at scales Japan couldn't imagine, producing ships, aircraft, tanks and weapons in quantities that would dwarf anything the Axis powers could produce. The rifle on the examination table was manufactured in 1941, stamped with a Springfield Armory serial number in the 2 million range. By the time it was captured at Manila in April 1942, American factories had probably produced another 1 million rifles. By year's end, that number would double again. Geometric growth in production capacity, sustained by an industrial base safely located across an ocean beyond the reach of Japanese bombers. Yamamoto's comprehensive report reached Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto and the Naval General Staff in June 1942. The timing coincided with the devastating defeat at Midway, where 4 Japanese aircraft carriers were lost in a single day. The strategic situation had shifted dramatically. Japan's offensive momentum was halting. The Americans were recovering faster than anticipated. Evidence now indicated that American infantry possessed clear firepower superiority through their standard-issue weapons. The Naval General Staff approved development of a semi-automatic rifle program in July 1942. However, the resources allocated reflected the competing demands of a nation fighting on multiple fronts. The Imperial Japanese Navy wanted improved firepower for its special naval landing forces, who would defend island garrisons against anticipated American attacks. But naval aviation, submarine construction, and surface fleet maintenance all competed for the same limited industrial capacity. The development program was assigned to Yokosuka Naval Arsenal, where Yamamoto had conducted his initial examination. Engineering teams were assembled, led by experienced weapons designers who had worked on previous semi-automatic rifle projects. Their task was formidable: reverse engineer the M1 Garand, adapt it to Japanese 7.7mm ammunition, simplify it for Japanese manufacturing capabilities, and achieve all this rapidly enough to matter in the ongoing war. Initial design work proceeded through late 1942. Engineers created detailed drawings based on captured rifles, now numbering approximately 10 examples recovered from various Pacific battlefields. They tested different loading mechanisms, settling on an internal 10-round magazine charged by 2 stripper clips. This eliminated the en bloc clip compatibility problem while maintaining semi-automatic operation. They modified the gas system to ensure reliable operation with Japanese ammunition, which had different pressure curves than the American, 30-06 Springfield. By early 1943, prototype toolroom examples were being fabricated. These handmade rifles allowed testing of design concepts before committing to production tooling. The prototypes revealed numerous challenges. The gas system required adjustment to function reliably. The trigger mechanism needed refinement. The magazine feed lips required careful tuning to prevent stoppages. Each problem was solved through patient engineering work, but each solution consumed time the nation couldn't afford. Meanwhile, combat reports from Pacific battlefields continued documenting the consequences of the firepower disparity. At Guadalcanal, from August 1942 through February 1943, Japanese infantry armed with Type 99 Arisakas faced American Marines carrying M1 Garands in brutal jungle combat. The Marines, despite being outnumbered in many engagements, generated overwhelming rifle fire that consistently broke up Japanese attacks. Japanese tactical doctrine emphasized aggressive night attacks with bayonet charges, tactics designed to offset American material superiority through audacity and surprise. But even at night, even when achieving tactical surprise, Japanese forces found that American rifle fire created devastating casualties. One particularly devastating engagement occurred in October 1942 during the Battle for Henderson Field. Japanese forces launched determined attacks against Marine defensive positions, achieving numerical superiority and initial surprise. But Marine rifle companies, dug into prepared positions and equipped with M1 Garands, generated such volume of accurate fire that Japanese attacks faltered despite repeated attempts. Japanese losses exceeded 3,000 killed, compared to approximately 100 American dead, a casualty ratio that made clear the consequences of the technological disparity. These reports reached Tokyo and added urgency to the semi-automatic rifle development program. But urgency couldn't overcome fundamental constraints. Japanese industry in 1943 was fully committed to producing aircraft, ships, and existing weapons for forces already engaged across the Pacific, Southeast Asia, and China. Every steel mill, every machine tool, every skilled worker was allocated to existing production. Adding a new weapon system required resources that simply didn't exist. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The development team at Yokosuka pressed forward nonetheless. By mid-1943, they had refined their design into a workable weapon. They designated the Type 4 rifle, named for the Japanese imperial year 2604, corresponding to 1944, when they anticipated beginning production. The Type 4 rifle strongly resembled the M1 Garand, but incorporated significant modifications. The most obvious external difference was the protruding magazine box beneath the stock, necessary to accommodate the 10-round capacity. The rifle used Japanese-style tangent rear sights graduated from 100 to 1,200 meters, replacing the Garand's simpler aperture sights. The front sight featured an inverted V with protective wings, standard on Japanese military rifles. Internally, the Type 4 followed the Garand's gas-operated rotating bolt design closely. The operating rod reciprocated beneath the barrel axis. The trigger mechanism used a similar configuration. The safety was located in the trigger guard like the M1. The receiver was machined from forged steel, requiring substantial manufacturing infrastructure. Testing of prototype rifles revealed satisfactory performance. The Type 4 could fire semi-automatically with acceptable reliability. Accuracy was comparable to the Type 99 Arisaka. Rate of fire approximated the M1 Garand, allowing a trained soldier to fire 30 to 40 aimed rounds per minute, more than double the Arisaka's maximum rate. But manufacturing proved to be the insurmountable challenge. The Type 4 required precision machining that Japanese arsenals struggled to achieve at scale. While craftsmen could hand-fit individual rifles to high standards, mass production demanded different capabilities. American factories used specialized machinery that maintained tight tolerances automatically. Japanese factories relied more heavily on skilled labor, a process that worked well for limited production but couldn't scale to the quantities required. If you're finding value in this detailed historical account, please consider subscribing to our channel. We rely on viewer support to continue producing in-depth content that explores the lesser-known stories of World War II and military history. Yokosuka Naval Arsenal began setting up production facilities in late 1943. They acquired machinery, trained workers, and developed manufacturing procedures. The goal was to begin producing rifles by mid-1944, with production gradually increasing through late 1944 and into 1945. The arsenal aimed to produce several hundred rifles per month initially, eventually reaching perhaps 1,000 per month if all went well. These production targets, modest by American standards, reflected Japanese industrial realities. Springfield Armory was producing nearly 4,000 M1 Garands per day by 1944. 44 times more rifles in a single day than Yokosuka hoped to produce in an entire month. American factories had achieved this through specialized machinery, standardized processes, and trained workers following proven procedures refined over millions of rifles. Japan was starting from nothing, attempting to compress years of development into months while fighting a losing war. Raw material shortages added another constraint. The Type 4 required high-quality steel for the receiver, operating rod, and barrel. Japan's steel production was declining as merchant shipping losses mounted and imported raw materials became scarce. Aircraft and naval vessel construction had priority for available steel. Small arms production competed for whatever remained. Ammunition production posed similar problems. Semi-automatic rifles consumed ammunition far faster than bolt-action weapons. An infantryman armed with a Type 4 would require significantly more ammunition per engagement than one armed with an Arisaka. Logistics planners calculated that fully equipping a single infantry division with Type 4 rifles would require ammunition production increases equivalent to supporting 3 divisions with Arisakas. Nevertheless, production began in early 1944. Yokosuka Arsenal fabricated parts sets for approximately 250 rifles. The work proceeded slowly, hampered by material shortages, worker training requirements, and competing demands on machine shop time. Each rifle required extensive hand fitting to ensure proper function. Some rifles performed well in testing, while others experienced jamming and feeding issues that required troubleshooting and modification. By the time the war situation deteriorated catastrophically in late 1944, only about 125 complete rifles had been assembled from the available part sets. Even these completed rifles suffered from reliability problems that would have required further development to resolve. The weapons were functional but not combat-ready. Events overtook the Type 4 program. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 destroyed Japanese carrier aviation. The fall of Saipan in July brought American B-29 bombers within range of the Japanese home islands. The Philippines campaign, beginning in October 1944, saw American forces return with overwhelming material superiority. MacArthur's forces brought millions of M1 Garands, supported by massive logistics networks that kept them supplied regardless of consumption rates. Japanese defenders in the Philippines fought with Type 99 Arisakas and whatever weapons they could capture or improvise. The Type 4 rifles, sitting incomplete in Yokosuka Arsenal, might have marginally improved Japanese defensive firepower had they been available in numbers. But 125 rifles couldn't change the course of battles involving hundreds of thousands of soldiers. As American bombers began targeting Japanese cities and industrial facilities in late 1944, production priorities shifted entirely to defensive weapons. Fighter aircraft, anti-aircraft guns, and coastal defenses consumed all available resources. The semi-automatic rifle program effectively ceased. The Type 4 rifles that existed remained at Yokosuka Arsenal, stored against potential use in the defense of the home islands should invasion occur. The bitter irony wasn't lost on the engineers who had worked on the project. They had successfully reverse-engineered the M1 Garand, adapted it to Japanese ammunition, and created a functional semi-automatic rifle. Their technical competence was never in question. But technical competence couldn't overcome industrial constraints, resource limitations, and strategic realities. They had produced approximately 125 rifles. The Americans had produced over 5.4 million M1 Garands by war's end. The ratio was staggering. For every Japanese Type 4 rifle, there were approximately 43,000 American M1 Garands. Japan's best effort to match American small arms technology had resulted in a weapon that equipped no combat units, influenced no battles, and arrived too late and in too few numbers to matter. When American occupation forces arrived at Yokosuka Naval Arsenal in September 1945, they discovered the Type 4 rifles still in storage. 20 rifles were confiscated and sent to the United States for technical intelligence analysis. American ordnance officers examined them with professional interest, noting the Japanese engineers' competent adaptation of Garand's design. The reports acknowledged that had Japan possessed the industrial capacity to produce these rifles in quantity earlier in the war, they would have meaningfully improved Japanese infantry capabilities. But this acknowledgement was purely technical, divorced from strategic reality. Even if Japan had somehow manufactured 10,000 Type 4 rifles, or 50,000, or 100,000, it wouldn't have altered the war's outcome. The M1 Garand wasn't the reason America won the Pacific War. American industrial superiority, manifest in millions of weapons, thousands of aircraft, hundreds of ships, and limitless supplies, determined the conflict's outcome. The captured rifles represented a broader failure of Japanese strategic planning. The nation had entered war against an opponent with industrial capacity roughly 10 times greater. Japanese leadership had gambled that superior tactics, highly trained forces, and aggressive action in the war's opening months would force American acceptance of Japanese conquests. They anticipated that Americans, culturally soft and lacking fighting spirit, would negotiate peace rather than pay the price of reconquest. This fundamental misunderstanding of American national character and industrial potential doomed Japan from the start. The M1 Garand symbolized American strengths Japanese planners had failed to appreciate. It represented industrial sophistication, the ability to mass-produce complex weapons to high-quality standards. It represented democratic values, equipping every citizen soldier with the best available technology rather than reserving superior weapons for elite units. It represented logistical capability, supporting weapons that consumed ammunition at high rates across vast ocean distances. Post-war analysis by military historians consistently identified the M1 Garand as a significant factor in American tactical success. While the rifle alone didn't determine battle outcomes, it provided American infantry with clear advantages in firefights at all levels. Squad engagements, company actions, and battalion battles all benefited from the superior rate of fire semi-automatic rifles provided. The Japanese experience fighting against M1-equipped forces was consistently negative. From Guadalcanal through Okinawa, Japanese infantrymen armed with bolt-action rifles faced American forces who could fire twice as many rounds in the same time. Japanese soldiers learned to recognize the distinctive sound of M1 Garand's firing, a rapid semi-automatic cadence unlike bolt-action rifle reports. They learned to fear the volume of fire American positions could generate. Individual Japanese soldiers who survived the war and were later interviewed consistently mentioned American firepower superiority. They described the difficulty of returning fire against positions generating continuous rifle shots. They recalled how machine gun-like fire came from individual American foxholes. They remembered the psychological impact of facing such firepower while armed with rifles requiring manual operation between each shot. One particularly poignant account came from a Japanese veteran who fought on Saipan in June and July 1944. He described his squad attempting to defend a ridge against an American assault. The Americans advanced by fire and maneuver, half the unit firing while half moved. The volume of M1 Garand fire was so intense that his squad couldn't raise their heads to return fire effectively. When they did fire, they managed perhaps 1 or 2 shots before ducking back down to avoid incoming rounds. The Americans advanced steadily, suppressing the Japanese position with rifle fire alone, no machine guns required. His entire squad was killed or wounded within 20 minutes. He survived only because he fell wounded and was assumed dead, lying in his foxhole as Americans advanced past and moved inland. This pattern repeated across hundreds of engagements throughout the Pacific Campaign. American firepower superiority at the individual soldier level, accumulated into tactical advantages at every level of combat. While Japanese forces sometimes achieved local successes through surprise, determination, or clever tactics, they could rarely exploit those successes because American rifle fire would inevitably pin them down. The story of Japanese engineers examining the captured M1 Garand and attempting to create their own semi-automatic rifle is ultimately a story about limits. Limits of industrial capacity, limits of resources, limits of what determination and skill can achieve when constrained by material realities. The engineers at Yokosuka Naval Arsenal did everything they could with what they had. They created a technically competent weapon under difficult circumstances. But technical competence wasn't enough when facing an opponent with overwhelming industrial superiority. Commander Yamamoto's initial assessment in May 1942 had been correct. The M1 Garand represented a fundamental challenge to Japanese infantry effectiveness, a weapon that provided clear tactical advantages in every firefight. His recommendation to develop a Japanese semi-automatic rifle was sound military advice. But sound advice couldn't overcome the industrial and logistical constraints that limited Japan's ability to respond effectively. The broader lesson extended beyond rifle development to the entire strategic situation. Japan had challenged an opponent they couldn't defeat through industrial capacity, technological innovation, and sheer productive output. The M1 Garand was one small example of these advantages, but it was representative of larger patterns. American factories produced everything in quantities Japan couldn't match. The M1 Garand's designer, John Cantius Garand, received no royalties for his invention despite it being produced in millions. Born in Quebec in 1888, immigrating to the United States in 1899, he devoted his career to creating weapons for his adopted country. He assigned all patent rights to the United States government, viewing his work as service rather than opportunity for personal profit. This embodied an ethic of contribution that powered American industrial mobilization. Garand's design philosophy emphasized simplicity, reliability, and manufacturability. He understood that warfare in the 20th century would be won by nations that could equip millions of soldiers with effective weapons, not by producing small numbers of perfect weapons for elite units. His rifle was optimized for production by semi-skilled workers using specialized machinery, achieving quality through process rather than individual craftsmanship. Japanese weapons development followed different principles. The Type 99 Arisaka was built with exceptional steel and meticulous craftsmanship. Individual rifles were carefully assembled and adjusted by skilled workers. This produced excellent weapons, but in limited quantities. When Japan attempted to adopt American manufacturing philosophy through the Type 4 program, they discovered that philosophy required industrial infrastructure they didn't possess. Before we conclude, I want to encourage you one more time to subscribe to our channel if you found this story compelling. We're committed to bringing you these detailed historical narratives that reveal the human stories and strategic realities behind major events. Your subscription and engagement help us continue this mission. The contrast between these approaches defined much of the Pacific War's outcome. American manufacturing emphasized volume, consistency, and efficiency. Japanese manufacturing emphasized quality, craftsmanship, and individual excellence. Both philosophies had merit in peacetime, but total war favored the approach that could arm entire armies with good enough weapons over the approach that could arm elite units with perfect weapons. The Type 4 rifle represented Japan's recognition that their traditional approach wasn't sufficient against American firepower. But recognition came too late, and couldn't overcome constraints imposed by industrial capacity and resource availability. The handful of rifles produced achieved nothing strategically, serving only as expensive lessons about the importance of industrial preparation before entering major wars. The rifles themselves, those few that survived and made their way into museums and private collections, remain rare artifacts today. Collectors prize them as examples of wartime Japanese engineering and as physical evidence of Japan's desperate attempts to match American capabilities. But their rarity is itself testament to the program's failure. If the Type 4 had succeeded, thousands would exist today. Instead, fewer than 200 examples were ever completed, most never issued to troops, all arriving too late to influence combat outcomes. By the spring of 1945, as American forces approached Okinawa and prepared for potential invasion of the Japanese home islands, the strategic situation had become hopeless. Japanese forces fought with courage and determination, but lacked weapons, ammunition, fuel, and supplies to effectively resist. American industrial production had created such material superiority that Japanese forces, no matter how skilled or motivated, couldn't compete. The M1 Garand was everywhere in American hands. Every Marine storming Iwo Jima's beaches in February 1945 carried one. Every Army soldier fighting through Okinawa's brutal terrain, from April through June 1945, was armed with this semi-automatic rifle. The weapon that had bloodied Japanese forces at Bataan in early 1942 had multiplied 1,000-fold, equipping millions of American servicemen across the Pacific theater. When Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender on the 15th of August 1945, the Pacific War ended with the firepower disparity that Commander Yamamoto had identified in May 1942 still unresolved. Japanese infantry had fought the entire war armed primarily with bolt-action rifles against an enemy equipped with semi-automatic weapons. This technological disadvantage, combined with countless other material shortages and strategic failures, contributed to Japan's defeat. Modern warfare had become industrial warfare, decided by production capacity rather than individual valor or tactical skill. Nations that understood this and prepared accordingly, building industrial bases capable of sustaining massive production, would defeat nations that emphasized traditional military virtues without comparable industrial support. The United States understood this lesson and built the arsenal of democracy. American factories produced weapons in quantities that overwhelmed Axis production. The M1 Garand was merely one product among millions, but it symbolized the entire philosophy. Equip every soldier with the best available technology, produce weapons in overwhelming quantities, support them with logistics that ensure unlimited supplies, and fight wars through industrial might rather than individual heroism. Japan learned this lesson the hard way, through defeat in battle after battle where material superiority proved decisive. The Type 4 rifle represented their attempt to learn and adapt, but the lesson came too late, and the adaptation was insufficient. The 125 Type 4 rifles that existed at war's end changed nothing. They influenced no battles, equipped no units, and arrived too late to matter. For the American servicemen who carried M1 Garands through the Pacific Campaign, the rifle was simply their weapon, reliable and effective, taken for granted as standard issue. They didn't think about the millions of rifles American factories produced, or the industrial mobilization that made such production possible. They knew their M1 Garand worked well, fired rapidly, and gave them advantages in firefights. That was enough. But historians examining the Pacific War's outcome recognize the M1 Garand's significance beyond its tactical performance. The rifle embodied American industrial strength and organizational capability. It represented a national commitment to equipping citizen soldiers with the best available technology. It symbolized the democratic industrial model that proved superior to totalitarian alternatives in the crucible of total war. Commander Yamamoto's examination of that captured M1 Garand in May 1942 had revealed all of this. The rifle in his hands represented industrial capabilities Japan couldn't match, manufacturing sophistication they couldn't replicate, and resource, the depth they couldn't compete against. His report documented these realities and recommended responses, but recommendations couldn't change what industrial capacity and material constraints made inevitable. The story of the M1 Garand and the Type 4 rifle teaches us that modern warfare requires more than courage, skill, or determination. It requires industrial preparation, resource allocation, and the ability to sustain production at scales that can equip entire armies. Nations entering wars without this preparation regardless of their military traditions or tactical excellence, face defeat against opponents who possess overwhelming material advantages. Thank you for watching this deep dive into one of World War II's lesser-known stories. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment letting us know what historical topics you'd like us to explore next. Your support makes content like this possible, and we're grateful for every subscriber who joins us on these journeys through history. Until next time, keep exploring the stories that shaped our world. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel